Welcome to Groups This Week. As a church, we exist to help all people become fully devoted followers of Jesus. We believe doing life together is a crucial part of that journey. During this time, we're going to unpack and dig deeper into the sermon we heard this past week. Let's dive in as we continue to grow in our faith, knowledge, and love of Jesus together.
Well, hey everybody, so good to see you. We're turning the tables a little bit because Ryan, you and AJ Swoboda over this last weekend across the different services, preached on probably one of my favorite spiritual practices, one that's been an anchor in my life over this last decade or so, and that is the rhythm of Sabbath.
Yeah.
And so maybe a good question for us to start with today as we talk about Sabbath is why should we practice Sabbath?
Yeah, oh man. And I think that's really the heart of so much of this practice is I think we can sometimes get caught up in do we have to do this?
Okay, yeah.
And while I'm not in the camp of believing that Sabbath is necessarily binding in the New Testament, in that if we don't take a 24-hour Sabbath, are we sinning? No, I don't believe that. But it's good for us to Sabbath. I think it's woven into the fabric of creation. We see that,
right.
All right, God creates in 6 days, rests on the seventh. Adam and Eve are created on the sixth. The seventh day they rest and then they work.
Yeah, wow.
And so I think it's wow, what a good God we have who would give us this gift of rest. And so I think, man, if nothing else, I think just the nature of things shows us that we need rest, right? Yeah. We live in a busy, exhausted culture where we can be worn out, burnt out. And so I think, man, rest recharges us. And not only is it meant to replenish us and work from that place of rest, but man, it's a day to enjoy God and enjoy his blessings, be with the important people in our lives, and worship him. Yeah. And so I think those are a few things that come to mind. Maybe actually even one other thing. Remember watching this show on Netflix. It was about these centenarians where they track different places in the world where
being people who live to 100 or longer. Right?
And what are the factors? And one of them was this Seventh-day Adventist group,
as well.
And they practice the Sabbath, every week. And they live, I can't remember what it was, but maybe 10 years longer than the average person.
Wow.
And it's okay, as we
There's
rest,
something to it. Yeah.
It is literally life-giving.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow.
Anything you'd add, Sam?
Oh, that's so good. And while maybe a lot of evangelical Christians aren't familiar with Sabbath as a practice, or might have questions about it. I remember growing up and not even thinking that was, I met someone in Bible college who practiced Sabbath with his family. I was that is so weird. Isn't Sabbath a Jewish thing? Do Christians, should they practice? So these questions. So while we might not be familiar with it or might have questions about it, I think we all have this sense that this go way of doing life isn't working, right?
Yeah.
I think many of us are tired, are burnt out, are longing for somebody to give us a different pattern for living. That's more life-giving, that doesn't leave us kind of at the end of our rope. Yeah. And so I think a beautiful one from Scripture, a beautiful pattern or rhythm, is this work for 6, rest for 1.
Yeah.
Work for 6, rest for 1. Like you said, it was built into creation. And then we see in the Ten Commandments, it show up again in both generations of the Ten Commandments, in Exodus chapter 20, again in Deuteronomy. And something that God wanted his people to experience is to live out of rest rather than, and you noted that the seventh day is rest. Man was made on the sixth day, and so I think it's interesting, and a good question is could it be that God was trying to communicate something even in this creation account? That we work from a place of rest. We don't work to earn rest.
Yeah, our identity isn't in our work, which is such a cultural idol, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, then jump to the New Testament, and Jesus was a little bit controversial when it came to Sabbath, right?
Definitely.
He ticked off some of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. Why was that?
Yeah, well, I think what Jesus is doing is he was intentionally, healing people on the Sabbath, casting out demons on the Sabbath, doing all these miraculous works. In Mark chapter 2, his disciples are in the grain fields, eating grain on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees get all up in arms about this. And so I think really what Jesus is doing is he's redeeming the proper interpretation of what Sabbath is supposed to be, where these scribes and Pharisees had created all these man-made rules about how to follow Sabbath, right? Like you can only take a certain number of steps. You know, you couldn't spit in the dirt and create mud like Jesus did when he healed the blind man, because that was classified as work. So there's all these like stipulations.
And even today, if you like, we were in Israel together.
Yeah, a couple of years ago on Sabbath in Jerusalem.
That's right, which was a really cool experience. But one of the things, like when you talk about all these additional rules that don't find themselves in the Torah, like in Scripture, one of the interesting ones for us was the elevators on the Sabbath.
Oh yeah, stop at every floor.
They stop at every floor, so you don't even have to push a button. And I think Jesus is like, no. Like you've missed the forest for the trees. You're getting this whole thing wrong. This is, and he has this really beautiful line in one of the Gospels. I think it's in Matthew, where he says, "The Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath."
Exactly.
Right. He's like, you guys have lost the plot line.
Again, it's a gift.
It's a gift. Yeah. This is something that, it's like when we talked about celebration recently as well, right? Like God commanded his people, even in the Old Testament, to feast and to gather with friends. And this is a God who wants us to delight and to have joy and to work from a place of rest. I just think that's such good news for us.
Yeah. And I think, like, you know, the note here as well is that Jesus is trying to show the scribes, the Pharisees, those who are watching, that Sabbath is meant to bring life and freedom, not oppression, like the Pharisees were doing, right? Like they're adding all these like extra rules, and it becomes oppressive to the people because they can't truly rest. So I think Jesus is bringing the heart of it, which is, this is meant to bring freedom and life and joy and blessing and rest.
Do you think it's possible that Jesus was making a statement by healing people on the Sabbath?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
What do you think he was saying with it?
Well, I think, okay, so I focused on Luke 13, 10 to 17, where Jesus heals this woman who's bent over for 18 years because of an unclean spirit. He heals her on the Sabbath. The leader of the synagogue gets, mad at Jesus, but I think it's showing that it was almost like a metaphor of her being released from captivity is what Sabbath is meant to do for us. We're supposed to be released from captivity to whatever we're enslaved to, different idols or work or exhaustion.
The machine.
Busyness.
Exactly.
It's meant to bring freedom.
This lie that we are what we do. Oh, that's so good. And in my life, that has absolutely been my story as I've practiced Sabbath over this last 12 years or so. It has undone so many of the lies of, I am what I do, or that I matter based on my productivity, or these sorts of things. And Jesus has and Jesus has done some of his most healing work in my life on Sabbath.
Wow.
And so I think he absolutely was making a statement, and kind of in Jesus fashion, right? He's modeling, he's showing what Sabbath is all about. Okay, what can it look like to Sabbath well in the 21st century, living in the Tri-Cities or wherever we find ourselves today?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've actually learned a lot from you, Sam, as you've really championed and valued this on staff. And so I would say, like, for my wife and I, like, we're maybe like a couple years into practicing Sabbath with regularity. And so, like, I think, practically speaking for us, what does it look like? It's going to look different for each person, each family, depending on stage of life, season, right? We've got a toddler now, so it looks different.
Probably looks a lot different
when we were
did.
dinks, double income, no kids. But typically what we'll do is, Friday night, we kind of practice from Friday night to Saturday night. We'll have dinner. We'll try to remember to light a candle. We like the kind of candle lighting ritual. Just to signify the start. Nothing magical in it.
No, nothing magical at all.
Exactly.
But it is a reminder that God is present with us, right?
Yeah. And it kind of gets you in that frame of mind too.
Love it.
Saturday morning, like, I'll just cook like a nice breakfast. Take time with it. Make good food. We'll usually go out for a walk. Immerse ourselves in the scriptures and pray while our daughter is down for a nap. Usually see some friends, enjoy good food, and do things that bring us joy. And so I think, like, some key things are, like, don't do chores, don't do errands. This isn't just a day off.
It is different from a day off, eh? On a day off, you do all the things you didn't get to do the rest of the week.
Exactly. That's a Sabbath prep day.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
And but here's an important note, like you said, it's different for everyone based on their stage of life. And so what I would hate for anybody to hear is, well, I can't do what you just described because I work shift work or I'm working multiple jobs in order to, life is just so expensive in the Tri-Cities right now. And so I would hate for you to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, and say, well, I can't do that, so I can't practice Sabbath.
Start where you are.
Absolutely, and it's about the spirit of Sabbath, not about the law, and that's what we just talked about, that Jesus was all about. So, so maybe it cannot look like a 24-hour period or even a 12-hour period in your life right now. I have a friend who has started practicing Sabbath over this last little bit. And he and his wife have the best that they can do right now is to split Sabbath over 2 days from like 3 o'clock till 9 p.m., 2 days in a row. And they're like, we're just going to, on the weekend, we're going to take this period of time and we're going to eat good food and we're going to rest and we're going to worship and we're going to spend time together and with our friends. And that's been really life-giving for them. And I think they're like, if at some point in our life we can do a 24-hour period or a longer stretch altogether, we'll incorporate that, but let's not say, well, we can't. And so we won't. Get creative with it. Totally. And so maybe let's end the conversation there. And I think a great conversation, even coming out of this video, is what could it look like for you? Maybe there's some in the group who've been practicing Sabbath a long time. Well, maybe there's others who this is a brand new idea that surfaced for you over this last weekend and through this conversation. And so why don't you take some time and talk about what could it look like in your current moment, stage of life, kind of family where you're at. And I believe that Jesus wants to meet you in and through this practice. Okay, God bless.
See you guys.
We hope you enjoyed the teaching today. If you're wanting to follow along with our community group's discussion guide with your group, you can head to cachurch.ca/media where you can find the discussion guide. Not only are there questions there related to the sermon, but there's also prayer prompts that relate to the passage or the topic that we were talking about, and practices that you can, on an individual level or a group level, begin integrating into your life to not only bring this knowledge into your mind, but to begin living it out.